Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy I get to introduce my friends from the continent. This is the third panel on Africa. This is going to look at cybersecurity and the rules that govern. We're going to have Alice, who's going to be helping us take us a tour through cybersecurity. She's going to be looking at Uganda. We have Teki from Accra, and of course, Lufuno from South Africa. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Alice. The stage is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Very happy to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'll first introduce myself briefly, and then I'll ask my fellow panelists to introduce themselves, and then I'll take it from there. I'm Alice Namuli Blazovic. I'm a tech and innovation lawyer in Kampala, specializing in cybersecurity, data protection, privacy, AI and blockchain. And I'm also a very, quite like a big time lobbyist for cybersecurity awareness on the continent. So I'm very happy to be here, to be part of this panel. Yes, Teki, can you introduce yourself?
Okay. All right. So thank you, Alice, and thank you, Saya, for this opportunity. My name is Teki Akuettah Faulkner. I'm a lawyer by profession with specialization in IT and telecommunications, and the founder and executive director of the Africa Digital Rights Hub, a think tank that looks at digital rights issues across Africa.
Lufuno?
And thank you, Jonathan. My name is Lufuno T. Khorommbi. I'm an admitted advocate, a cyber law specialist who has also founded Orizur Consulting Enterprise. I'm also a former public servant who also won awards when I was still serving the public. The main purpose of the consulting business is to assist clients to achieve a compliant, cyber-secure environment, whilst also helping them to reduce financial risks. So that will be the simple introduction about me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you. So our panel will be quite interactive, I would say. First, I'm going to speak about an overview of cybersecurity regulatory framework in Africa. Then I'll also, during that, I will talk about specifically in Uganda, the kind of regulations we have. And then I'll ask my panelists to also share their experience in their specific countries. Then secondly, we will talk about the challenges we're experiencing in enforcement of cybersecurity regulations on the continent. And then at the end, we'll we'll try to address the solutions to all the challenges we are having on the continent. And we'll try as much as possible to also go into specifics in, of course, our countries or regions where we come from. I come from East Africa, Teki comes from West Africa, and Lufuno comes from South Africa. So I'll start with the overview of cybersecurity. I hope everyone can be able to see my screen. And yeah. So Teki, are you able to see my screen? Please just say yes. Hello? Hello?
Oh. See the screen.
You can see the screen, okay.
Yes, I can.
Good. So what I wanted to first share with you is the background of where this whole, like I would say, cybersecurity phenomenon is coming from, or the growth of what is the driving force behind cybersecurity on the African continent. As I'm sure all of you are aware, that there's a very big exponential growth of internet use on the African continent. In the last couple of years, we've seen it grow from like 4.5 million people using the internet to over 500 million people as of last year in December. And we're also experiencing some of the things that are driving the cybersecurity industry are exponential growth in e-commerce, which is of course driven by all these high-tech startups on the scene, and they of course change the way we are doing everything, the way we live, the way we do business. And there are a couple of those companies that are actually have become like the flag bearers of e-commerce on the continent. For example, you've heard of Jumia. But all this, the growth of e-commerce, despite the fact that there has been a lot of growth with e-commerce, we've realized that it has definitely come with a few negatives here and there. And so, which has also led, the growth of e-commerce has led to so many concerns that arise over misuse of the internet and the need to promote cybersecurity governance on the continent. What we've also experienced is that on an annual basis, we experience hundreds of millions of sophisticated cyber attacks on the continent, where the market has definitely been oversaturated with cyber attacks here and there. There's a lot of fraud going on, theft in financial institutions, government, private companies. Pretty much everyone has had a couple of attacks, or rather each sector has had several attacks. And the most recent ones I think we had last year, or pretty much it's not very recent, but it was mid last year and at the end of last year. Mid last year, we had the Kenyan government website, 18 of them were hacked. And luckily enough, not much data was compromised, or critical data was not compromised. And also we had cyber attacks on the South African government websites. So, but then again, and rather fortunately, would say that there was not much data compromised in both scenarios. But still, that doesn't take away the fact that all those kind of scenarios should be ignored. Globally, when we look at the Global Cybersecurity Index, we find that Africa as a continent is clearly not performing very well. You can look at this chart or graph where you can see like the statistics of the most affected African countries. You can just go through them. But then due to the kind of, I guess, risks or increased risk that cybersecurity has posed on the continent, a couple of years ago, that was I think in 2014 or 15, the African Union decided to come up with some kind of cyber security framework. Or before I get to that, as you've seen this chart, still it's not you've noticed that Africa clearly we're not doing very well, and unfortunately still many African countries have no specific cyber legislation. There are only very few countries that where cybersecurity regulations exist, and where those regulations exist, we've noted that there's very little adherence or implementation enforcement. And this has also been due to general lack of awareness of cybersecurity measures, which has also led to Africa being a very conducive environment for cybercrime in Africa. So far, these are some of the countries that have some kind of cybersecurity regulations in specific data protection and privacy laws. We have 21 countries, actually not 21 now. I think they're, hello, sorry. Are you able to see the different slides, Lufuno?
Yes, I
Right?
can still see your slides. Yeah.
The slides are coming through. Okay, good. Yes, so you can see that several countries, a couple of other countries we have there. Uganda is there. At least we had our cybersecurity, rather data protection and privacy law passed last year in February. So one of the new countries. Kenya is the newest. That's coming last year in end of last year. I would just want to give a specific example in Uganda. These are some of the cybersecurity or regulations that we have that govern the internet. As you can see, we're not doing badly, but unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, we still lack implementation or enforcement, and this is due to several things I'll share later. The kind of challenges definitely we have in Uganda. Our data protection was passed, Data Protection and Privacy Act was passed in December, rather last year in 2019, I mentioned that. And this was has very similar clauses to the GDPR. It was actually kind of benchmarked to the GDPR. In fact, some of the clauses are very, very, very similar. One of them, I guess, which is quite harsh, most Ugandans find quite harsh, is the penalty of 2% in case of a breach or any data breach by a company, where a company would be penalized to pay 2% of its annual gross income. At a regional level, there's of course various efforts that have gone on to ensure data protection within the regional blocks. I'll give an example, the SADC, but that one, I think Lufuno will give us more depth into it, which has developed a modulo harmonizing policies for the ICT market in sub-Saharan Africa. Then we have the ECOWAS, that is West African states, that has also created a supplementary act on personal data and protection. Then we have the Francophone countries. They've also have an association of personal data protection. But I would just wanted to go back to the point which I had brought up earlier, that of course, as a continent, the African Union in 2014 passed the African Union on the Convention on the African Union on Cybersecurity and Protection of personal data, where it requires all member states to establish or to ratify this regulation in all its various jurisdictions. Unfortunately, not many countries have heed to this call. There are very few of them. As you can see, only, I think, as of last year, it was 10. It's not a very good sign, clearly. But generally, what I can say is that at least the African Union, rather the Charter, has proved like as a good step for the African Union to try as much as possible to come up with some regulations that govern the whole continent. But unfortunately, this has not yet come to fruition. Very few countries are willing to come on board, and unfortunately, we are still in the same state. And also those countries that have ratified or have tried to come up with regulations are still not able to enforce or implement. We'll get into the challenges in the next question. That's it briefly about cybersecurity on the African continent. Thank you very much. I will now ask Teki to share with us the regulatory environment or for cybersecurity in Ghana or generally West Africa.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Alice, and thank you for the very comprehensive a brief that you just gave. If I will say anything specifically about Ghana, I would say that, you know, Ghana, no doubt, is one of the countries in Africa that have a very, very vibrant ecosystem of cyber laws and regulations. This process began sometime back in 1996 with the liberalization of the telecommunications sector. And then we also saw the passage of the 2003 ICT policy for accelerated development policy, which a lot of these laws were born out of. We have a mix of both public and private laws across the country or in Ghana that actually govern the cyberspace in Ghana. No doubt our constitution plays a key role in helping ground most of these laws. But you will also find specifically laws such as the Electronic Communications Act and regulations. You will find the Electronic Transactions Act. You will find data protection. And then parts of these laws, specifically the electronic transactions, also deals with cyber crimes, and that works in tandem with our criminal laws as well. Now, in the same ecosystem, there are a number of agencies that are actually pushing these agenda. Some of them are statutory bodies, some are governmental agencies such as ministries, departments that are helping implement the policies and frameworks. And then also we have you know, private sector, of course, and a number of associations that are actually pushing this agenda. Specifically as well, you are likely to find a number of sector-specific guidelines and processes in areas such as IT, and then the financial services that also have some requirements to further boost the ecosystem. Now, the interesting thing is that Ghana has signed the Malabo Convention that you mentioned, the Convention on Cyber Security and Data Protection of the AU. Ghana signed on to that. It is yet to ratify. Ghana has also signed on to the ECOWAS Supplementary Acts on personal data protection, the directive on cyber crime, as well as the directive on the electronic transactions, of which Ghana is signatories. Just last year as well, internationally, our country ascended to the Budapest Convention as well. I think that I will come back to discuss a lot more. So you can tell that by way of laws and frameworks, there are a myriad of laws. We have, just about last year, we have cybersecurity policies that are also being implemented. And so it's a very vibrant ecosystem of laws, policies, frameworks that exist in the country. I think that when you give me the opportunity, we can then talk a bit more about whether these laws and policies and guidelines are actually working the way they should be. But definitely, I think Ghana is one of the countries in Africa that, you know, can boast of a lot of laws on our books.
Thank you very much, Teki, for that. Lufuno? Can you give us some overview on what's happening in South Africa or the southern part of Africa? We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Hello? Teki, can you hear Lufuno?
No. So maybe we should,
Hello?
Okay.
Great. Okay.
Yes, I was still saying that. Thanks, Desmond. I was still saying that South Africa is a democracy which is governed by the constitution established in 1996. And within our constitution, called the Bill of Rights. And the right to privacy has been identified as one of the fundamental human rights that needs to be promoted and be protected. So cybersecurity laws and policies have direct impact on human rights, including this right to privacy, freedom to speech and expression, and as well as information flow. So we have the laws that is of information, Promotion of Access to Information Act, which also has a section that deals with how you access information, particularly the one that is personal data. We also have the Electronic Communication Transaction Act, which is the basis of cybersecurity regulatory framework in South Africa. It was enacted in 2002 to ensure that everyone is protected online, particularly where e-commerce is concerned. There was another act that is read together with the ECT Act, Consumer Protection Act. So there are sections within the ECT Act, the Electronic Communication and Transaction Act, that deals with issues of, and that was extended further with the Consumer Protection Act, which was in 2008. We have also the National Cybersecurity Policy Framework that was done in 2012. And this framework was to set guidelines related to cybersecurity and to define the approach and focus that we need to be focusing on as a country as far as the cyberspace is concerned. And from this National Cybersecurity Policy Framework, few things happened, including the establishment of the Cybersecurity Hub, Computer Security Incident Response. We have had 3 more policies coming out as a result of the National Cybersecurity Policy Framework of 2012. And one of that is the Cyber Crime Bill that we have not enacted yet, but it has gone through the parliamentary processes. So what we have currently is a number of laws that are fragmented, and this cybersecurity bill and the subsequent cybersecurity bill is intended to bring everything together, making it easier to comply for everybody. We also have the Protection of Personal Information Act, which also lent some wisdom from the GDPR, and this was enacted in 2013. So in terms of social media, last year, December, the Film and Publication Amendment Act was enacted by the President. It is yet to come to effect, but in terms of protecting the right to privacy, I can say the government is making efforts. Intentions are there to protect people's right to privacy, right to freedom of expression, and right to access to information. The cybersecurity bill is not moving forward yet because of the concerns raised in terms of lack of balance in terms of the human rights to privacy and the government right to regulate. So we, as I said, we're a democratic country where human rights are paramount. So the laws that are put in place also considers or are supposed to be based on the Constitution of the Republic and to ensure that the Bill of Rights is promoted and it's protected. And I believe I will also deal with the other issues in terms of whether the available legal framework is.
No. Thank you very much, Lufuno. I think we've actually we all now believe that we have the right laws. We have all the regulations that definitely are in charge or in relation to the cybersecurity industry. But then we also find that very few of those regulations have been implemented or enforced. I would like to both of you to share with our audience what are those challenges that you have faced in your country, or what do you think are those challenges that are facing the whole of Africa in regards to enforcement of cybersecurity regulation? I'll start with you, Teki. Or actually, I would say in my country, in Uganda, there are 3 things or 4 things I could share. The first one is lack of awareness. Definitely, as you know, majority of the citizens in the country, that is Uganda or on the continent, are kind of illiterate and they have no idea about what these regulations are. But 2, do they even understand what privacy is? Very few of them understand, and even those who understand it don't even appreciate it. Then the other one is an enforcement mechanism, that is the judiciary, the police, have also not been able to fully appreciate cybersecurity regulation. So it becomes very difficult for them to implement or enforce something they've not been able to. They don't actually also appreciate from the start. Even our regulators, they've passed all these laws, but you'll find that in my country specifically, I've told you the data protection regulations were passed last year in 2019 in February. But up to now, we don't have an enforcement which is required under the Act to regulate this industry. Well, it is there. I mean, it is mentioned in the Act, but in case there's a data breach or anything, we've not had any cases or enforcement or where they've come out and actually been effective. So it's quite absurd, but at least that's where we are. So for me, I always find it actually quite weird that not only even in this sector, but so many, of course, sectors, lack of enforcement is such a big issue on the continent. And I know, I'm sure you in both countries, that is Ghana and South Africa, you share some of these challenges. But I would like to ask you specifically to share with us, Teki, what are
Yes.
some of those challenges?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So, like I mentioned, Ghana does not lack the laws. Now, interestingly as well, in the last 10 years, I believe our governments have done extremely well to take steps in actually implementing these laws. So when I talk about implementation of the laws, I'm talking about at least setting up the right structures and institutions to enable facilitation of these. So specifically, I'm looking at we have the National Communications Authority that regulates the Electronic Communications Act and regulations thereunder, which specifically regulates the communications sector. We have the Electronic Transactions Act, which is implemented by an institution called the National IT Agency, NITA. That was also set up a while back. We also have the Data Protection Commission, which is implementing the Data Protection Commission. And of course, you will find several other sectors, such as the Bank of Ghana regulating mobile money and other activities thereunder. So in terms of implementations of these laws, I would say that significant steps have been taken by forming or putting in place the right institutions that can implement that. What I have seen as a challenge is that after we set up these institutions, we do not resource them well. So they are not well resourced in terms of the human capacity. This is a highly specialized area that needs special skill and expertise. And so you find that recently, I don't know if everyone followed, the CNN, reported a Russian throw factory in Ghana. Now, interestingly, I was trying to follow up on this issue, and it turned out the gentleman was picked up and arrested. And guess what? Strangely, we were not able to pin on him any of the issues that had to do with the throwing. And I do not think this was as a result of lack of laws. But I also think that the necessary resources to get the right kind of information, to make sure that the evidence that is picked up, the forensics that go to pick credible evidence, is not there. Eventually, he was charged for a crime that is not necessarily related to the, cyber related activity, which we all saw as something wrong. He was charged with money laundering, which had nothing to do with the cyber environment and the challenges that led to him being found out. So there's a big problem there that we have. And I think these are generally, the laws are there, but we're not putting in the necessary resources and structures that we need to also implement these laws. And to put in another challenge, especially with the democratic societies that we have, sometimes some of these organizations also end up being politicized, which is also another big challenge, because this is a highly technical area, and you need adequate people with the right skill set. And these people are usually not people wearing political colors or anything of that sort. So when we end up politicizing some of our government, these very important government agencies as well, it takes away, the ability to also attract a very useful and knowledgeable resource. You're muted.
Thank you very much for that, Teki. I think we have lost Lufuno.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
I can continue on what we could be doing,
okay,
until it comes back. So, I mean, these are all very interesting and laudable things that we have done. We have the laws. Now we also have the people, because Africa is endowed with the knowledge and the skill set. The only challenge is that our public sector, which normally governs these issues, especially when it comes to the laws, because these are public laws, they do not have the resource to attract them. And so maybe it is very important, and it's high time that our government starts seeing the importance of cyber laws and the importance of these institutions to our entire ecosystem. And by understanding and affirming the importance, we also need to look at equipping these institutions with the right resources that they need so that they can implement it in a very efficient way. And I like to say that, we look at what COVID has done to all of us. We're living in an ecosystem right now where IT is going to inform socioeconomic growth. And so it's very important that we place it on the level that it requires. And I think that is why these laws are all important, but that is more reason why their implementation is even more important now than ever. We lost Lufuno again.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Again, we've lost that. Yeah, but anyway, for me, I'm thinking some of the things definitely we have to do we don't need, I think, more regulations. Like you have said it very well, Teki. We have very good laws. My country is one of those countries that are known for having the best laws, but with, of course, very little implementation. So if it's not about the laws, so what is it then? Like you've mentioned, I think building capacity is extremely important, both on the side of course, the implementers and also the cybersecurity experts. How do we how do we create more capacity on the continent? Where do we start? How can we actually join hands to make sure that we have more cybersecurity experts on the continent who are able to actually to deal with these issues, or at a more technical, with more technical experience, and also how do we how can I say, is it, I've been part of different platforms discussing these issues, and one of the key things that also came out is it that on the African continent we just don't understand what actually privacy is? Because I'll give an example in other areas or fields, like for example intellectual property. It took us a very, very long time even to understand what intellectual property is in Africa. Is it that some of the challenges some people have come up with, or the reasons why we're having these issues on African continent, is because the laws we have been mostly copied and pasted from another, like the Western world, that we as Africans are just not able to actually understand. So should we like come up with definitions of what cybersecurity is in our way? I mean, what do you think about that?
I mean, it's an interesting way to look at it. For once, yes, I believe that some of these laws were inherited. But unfortunately, when it comes to IT, we are not working in a system that gives us that much flexibility to define what we want. I'm the first person to say that, yes, Africa should look at its ecosystem and adapt laws that are very suitable for our purposes. But I would not say that let us reinvent the wheel. The reason is that unfortunately, whether we like it or not, the technology we're using is also borrowed technology. So which part of it, and a lot of it is you're not even the ones that are building these technologies. Majority of our countries are consuming these technologies. So you're going to even have a challenge when you talk about reinventing the wheel. But it is also very important that we do not just blindly adopt these laws because it is suitable. You know, the reason is that we are peculiar people. We have our peculiar culture and diversity, which influences the way we do things. And so anytime we're looking at these laws, I believe that we should allow as much flexibility in the development of the laws to enable us have that flexibility to reflect, you know, to make sure that the laws that we are putting in place, the guidelines reflect the ecosystem. Okay, so let me give an example. So you are implementing a data protection law, but you do not have the resources. You do not have the right experts. Is there a way that you can augment to still get the industry knowledge and skill set within your communities and yet still maintain your integrity? So those are the kind of things that we should be looking at. How do you get close enough to industry and expertise to tap into their knowledge? You know, so that knowledge informs how you do things. Those are the things, because our peculiar problem, it's not so much, I don't think even our issues with intellectual property has to do with the fact that we don't understand or we don't know what it is. You know, it has to do.
No, it's not that. It's different.
Yeah, it has to do. It has to do with.
We interpreted the infringement differently.
It has to do with resources. I think it all boils down to resources. You know, what are the resources that are available? And I think that is where we need to be very innovative in how we adapt and implement some of these laws.
Thank you very much, Teki. Unfortunately, we lost Lufuno, but we've also clearly run out of time. But thank you very much for definitely sharing with us your experience. Yes. It's been a pleasure sharing this panel with you.
Same here.
I hope Lufuno, I guess we'll catch up some other time. To our audience, thank you very much for listening. Our profiles, I think, are available to everyone clearly. So in case we are happy to be contacted and share more on what's going on the African continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.